When we look at the ruins of ancient civilizations or we read the histories of these great empires, we usually expect to see this like really slow, agonizing decline.
Right, yeah, like the gradual erosion of power over time.
Exactly. We expect the long, drawn-out fall of Rome or, the gradual fading away of a dynasty over a few
Yeah,
centuries.
it's the crumbling of walls over generations. The
Yes.
slow decay of institutions because of, I don't know, corruption or famine or overexpansion. It's almost a law of historical physics, really.
Yeah, it's a slow fade. You can trace the rot over decades. But then you step into the world of ancient Israel under its most famous king, and you don't see a slow fade at all.
Yeah, not even a little bit.
You see this blinding flash of brilliance, like a peak so high, so perfect, it almost defies logic. And then,
Catastrophic, almost instantaneous structural collapse.
yes, a collapse from the inside out, which is exactly what we're looking at today. Welcome to the deep dive, everyone.
It's good to be here. Because this story, it's the absolute definition of a structural and spiritual paradox.
It really is. You have the highest peak of divine blessing and human achievement, followed immediately by a devastating, self-inflicted fracture. It's like building the most magnificent, earthquake-proof, technologically advanced skyscraper the world has ever seen, standing back to admire it in all its glory, and then watching the lead architect just, walk over and quietly take a sledgehammer to the main load-bearing pillar.
That is a brutally accurate way to describe it.
Today, we're exploring an incredible essay by Chris R. Velasquez. It's titled Wisdom and Glory, Solomon's Reign as a Portrait of Kingdom Splendor. And our mission for this deep dive into the source material is not to just recite the dry annals of some ancient monarch.
Right, we're not just doing a history timeline here.
No, not at all. Our mission is to explore Solomon's reign as a blueprint. A deeply theological, incredibly vivid portrait of what it actually looks like when wisdom, peace, and blessing all align perfectly in the human experience.
And crucially, it serves as a sobering, like flashing red warning light about how terrifyingly fast it all unravels the exact second that loyalty to the original design fractures.
Okay, let's unpack this. Because on one hand, you have dazzling success. I mean, unprecedented wealth, intellectual mastery, a time of utter peace in a notoriously violent region of the world.
Yeah, the ancient Near East was not known for its peaceful eras.
Definitely not. And on the other hand, you have a tragic, monumental downfall that literally tears a nation in two. So how do those two realities exist in the exact same person?
Well, to understand the sledgehammer, we first have to examine the breathtaking height of the peak, right? We have to look at the architecture of that success.
Right. Where do we even start with that?
So the author of our source material, Velasquez, uses this incredibly precise phrase to describe this era. He calls Solomon's reign a polished threshold in the history of redemption.
A polished threshold. Wow. I actually love that imagery. It implies you haven't entered the final room yet. You are standing in the doorway, but the doorway itself is just magnificent.
That's spot on. The essay frames this specific period of time as the exact moment where the ancient promises made to King David, Solomon's father, obviously suddenly bloom into what the author calls visible magnificence.
Visible magnificence.
Right. And to understand just how jarring this was, you have to remember the context for the people actually living through it.
Yeah.
David's reign was characterized by blood.
Yeah, constant warfare.
Constant grinding warfare, expanding borders, internal rebellion. David was fundamentally a man of war. But when Solomon takes the throne, the text tells us the land is at rest. There's an absolute absence of the existential threat of invasion.
Which, if we pause and think about the ancient Near East for a second, is almost unfathomable. Imagine living in a society where for your entire life, the threat of a neighboring empire coming in to, burn your crops and take your family captive it's just gone.
It's totally removed from their daily psychological burden.
Right. But okay, I want to push back on this for a second, or at least play devil's advocate for the listener who might be thinking this. Isn't this just like basic macroeconomics?
How do you mean?
Well, if you stop spending all your nation's resources on fighting endless wars, of course you're going to get rich. Why do we have to attribute this to some grand divine order or a theological threshold? Why isn't it just a period of really, really good ancient geopolitical management?
That is the exact tension the author addresses early on.
Hmm.
Because a secular historian might look at this era and say, Solomon simply capitalized on a power vacuum.
Right, like Egypt was weak, Assyria wasn't quite dominant yet.
Exactly. So he controlled the trade routes and got rich. Just right place, right time. But Velasquez argues from the text that this is something entirely different. It's not just the presence of wealth, it's the character of the society.
The character of the society. Unpack that for us.
Well, the source gives us the specific elements of this peak. Yes, the land is at rest and wealth is accumulating rapidly. But simultaneously, you have wisdom flowing from the king in a way that the text says is like water from a deep spring.
Wow.
The temple rises in luminous majesty, and above all, moral order prevails. It's the synthesis of these things that makes it unique. It's not chaotic, cutthroat growth.
Right, it's perfectly structured flourishing. It's not like a gold rush where everyone is just stabbing each other in the back to get rich.
Precisely. Velazquez emphasizes that this is a theological image, not merely a record of economic prosperity. It is a moment where holiness, peace, intelligence, beauty, and divine blessing are perfectly joined together.
Which almost never happens.
Right. In human history, political order is usually achieved through brutal suppression. You keep the peace by terrifying the populace.
And the iron fist.
Yeah, the iron fist. Or, conversely, you have periods of immense wealth that are completely devoid of moral character. Think of the decadence of late-stage Rome, right?
Oh, yeah. Wealth without morality is just decay.
Exactly. But here you have political stability, immense wealth, and deep moral and spiritual wisdom coalescing at the exact same time.
It's the ultimate what if. What if humanity actually got it right? What if a ruler was actually wise, the people were genuinely safe, and God was truly honored all at once?
And that is why the term threshold is so vital. A threshold is a preview. It implies that you are stepping into something, but you haven't arrived at the final destination yet.
A glimpse of the ideal.
Yes. Solomon's reign is this stunning, fragile preview of righteous kingdom life. It's a taste of what Eden was supposed to be, but it's not the end of the story of redemption.
Just think about what it must have been like to actually be an ordinary person, a farmer or a merchant, living in Israel during that specific window of time.
It would have been totally surreal.
Right. You wake up, your fields are secure, your economy is booming, your justice system is actually fair, and your nation is a beacon of culture. It makes me think about those incredibly rare moments in our own lives, right?
Yeah, those fleeting moments of perfection.
Exactly. Think about your career or a project you've worked on, or even just a season with your family. Have you ever experienced a season where everything just worked?
Oh man, when everything clicks.
Yes. The team is perfectly in sync, nobody is dealing with petty drama, the resources are fully there, the mission is crystal clear, and you are just firing on all cylinders. You wake up energized, everything you touch seems to succeed. It's exhilarating.
Psychologists actually call that a flow state.
Really? A flow state?
Yeah, it's where your skills perfectly match the challenge, and time just seems to slip by because you are so entirely engaged and aligned with what you're doing.
A flow state, yes. Now, I want you to imagine that feeling, that absolute perfection of a flow state, but scale it up to an entire nation.
Which is mind-boggling.
Millions of people, an entire geopolitical entity, existing in a flow state of peace, prosperity, and divine blessing. That is the polished threshold. That is the peak. But if we want to extract a takeaway here before we move on, the most fascinating thing to me is that this flow state, this magnificent era, didn't start the way empires usually start.
Yeah. It doesn't start with a bloody military conquest, and it didn't start with a shrewd political power grab.
So how do you actually acquire that kind of national flow state?
Well, according to the text, it started with a dream, a confession of deep personal weakness, and one very, very specific request.
Which brings us to the foundational events at Gibeon.
Yes, recorded in the biblical text of 1 Kings chapter 3. If you want to understand the architecture of Solomon's kingdom, you have to understand this one night.
Okay, set the scene for us. What is happening historically at this exact moment?
So Solomon is a very young man. He has just inherited the throne of his father, David. Now, David was a legendary warrior, a giant of a figure who cast a massive shadow.
Yeah, he's the guy who killed Goliath. Those are big shoes to fill.
Impossibly large shoes. So Solomon goes to a place called Gibeon to offer sacrifices. And the text says that God appears to Solomon in a dream, and God hands him, essentially, a blank check.
A blank check from God.
Right. The creator of the universe says to this young, overwhelmed king, "Ask what I shall give you."
I mean, just pause and consider the sheer psychological weight of that offer. Ask what I shall give you. The temptation there for any human being, let alone an ancient monarch with absolute power, is astronomical.
It's the ultimate test of character.
If I'm being completely honest, I'd probably be asking for, like, a flawless immune system, $1 billion, and maybe the ability to never need sleep.
I think most of us would.
Right. What was the standard answer for a king in the ancient Near East if they were given a blank check by the gods?
Oh, the standard requests were entirely predictable. You asked for vast personal wealth, an unnaturally long life, and the brutal, bloody death of all your geopolitical enemies.
The triad of ancient power.
Exactly. But Solomon does the exact opposite. He doesn't puff his chest out. He doesn't project strength or demand invincibility. He confesses his youth.
Which takes incredible vulnerability.
He tells God, I am but a little child. I do not know how to go out or come in. He looks at the sheer size of the nation he is supposed to lead and openly admits he lacks the capacity to govern them.
And then he makes the ask. And the text says he asks for an understanding mind to govern your people, that I may discern between good and evil. That's the quote. An understanding mind, or I think some translations say a hearing heart.
Yes, a hearing heart. And Velazquez calls this one of the most theologically revealing prayers in all of Scripture.
Why is that?
Because instead of asking for something visible like gold or dead enemies, he asks for something inevitable. And we have to ask why. Why ask for an understanding mind when you could literally have unassailable military dominance?
It seems counterintuitive for a king.
It does. But Velazquez points out that Solomon recognizes a profound, terrifying truth right at the start of his reign. And that truth is that kingdom authority without moral discernment is ruinous.
Kingdom authority without moral discernment is ruinous. Wow. That is a heavy concept.
It changes everything about how we view power.
Because power without character is essentially just a weapon waiting to go off in your own hands.
Precisely. Solomon understands that if he has all the wealth and all the military might, but lacks the moral capacity to govern justly, he will destroy the very people he is supposed to protect.
A king without moral discernment just becomes a tyrant.
Exactly. So he seeks the moral order of God first. And because he does that, the text tells us God is pleased. It's a rare moment where a human actually asks for the exact right thing. So God grants him the wisdom he asked for, but then adds the riches, the honor, and the long life that he didn't ask for.
To bring this into our modern context, it's like a young, totally inexperienced 20-something suddenly being named the CEO of a massive Fortune 500 company.
Right, totally out of their depth.
And the board of directors calls them in, hands them a literal blank check, and says, what do you need to make this work? Do you want a corporate jet? Do you want $1 billion marketing budget? Do you want us to initiate a hostile takeover of all your competitors?
All the standard CEO perks.
Yeah. And the young CEO pushes the check back across the table and says, I don't want any of that. I want the profound ability to deeply, truly understand the needs of my employees and the people who buy our products so I don't ruin their lives with my own incompetence.
It's an entirely unnatural response. It requires a profound, almost supernatural humility. But here's where the source text gets really interesting.
Okay, where do we go next?
Well, the biblical narrative doesn't just leave this wisdom as some abstract philosophical concept floating in the ether.
Right, it has to look like something in the real world.
Exactly. It immediately grounds it. It gives us a visceral, highly intense case study of what this newly granted wisdom actually looks like when applied to real, messy human life.
Right, the famous story of the 2 women and the baby. This happens in 1 Kings 3, right after the dream at Gibeon.
Yes.
It's one of those stories that has permeated culture so deeply that even people who have never opened a Bible usually know some version of it. You hear people talk about splitting the baby in legal negotiations all the time.
It's become a total cultural idiom.
But let's actually look at the mechanics of what happens here, because when you read it, it's wild. Okay. Set the scene for us.
The setup is a judicial nightmare. 2 women, who the text identifies as prostitutes, live alone in a house together. They both give birth a few days apart. One night, one of the infants dies. The mother accidentally rolls over on him in her sleep.
It's just a horrific tragedy.
Terrible. She wakes up, realizes what she's done, and secretly swaps the dead infant for the living infant of the other woman while she's sleeping.
Huh.
By morning, a massive dispute erupts, and soon, both women are standing before the king, both claiming to be the mother of the single living infant.
And remember the context of the ancient world here. There's no DNA testing.
No fingerprints?
There are no witnesses because they lived alone. It is a pure he said, she said scenario with a human life hanging in the balance. And these are marginalized women. They don't have powerful husbands advocating for them. It's just their word against each other.
Exactly. And Solomon's solution is, on its face, utterly shocking.
Right. It sounds insane.
He listens to them argue, and then he says, bring me a sword. He orders his guards to cut the living child in 2, and give half to one woman and half to the other.
Which, if you were an observer in that courtroom, sounds like the act of a lunatic, not a divinely wise king. It sounds completely brutal.
But that is exactly where Velazquez draws out the true nature of biblical wisdom. This specific event proves that Solomon's wisdom is not just a high IQ.
It's not just book smarts.
Right. It's not just intellectual processing power or cleverness. It is the capacity to judge justly under God. He uses the threat of the sword as a psychological scalpel.
A psychological scalpel, I like that. He creates an artificial crisis to force the truth to the surface.
Precisely. He knows that true maternal love will always choose the life of the child over the possession of the child. When the order is given, the true mother immediately screams out, "Give her the child, don't kill him."
She is willing to lose her son to her rival just to see him live.
Yes. Meanwhile, the liar, driven by jealousy and spite, says, "Let him be neither mine nor yours. Divide him." The truth of their hearts is instantly, undeniably exposed.
Solomon's wisdom, as the author points out, is the ability to see beneath appearances. He penetrates these deeply tangled, deceitful human claims, and ultimately his wisdom is designed to protect life.
It's moral clarity in action.
And the text says that after this, the people perceived that the wisdom of God was in him to do justice. It wasn't just that he was smart, it was that his intelligence was fundamentally aimed at justice and life.
And if we are pulling a takeaway from this section, it's that true biblical wisdom is never just theoretical. It is deeply practical, and it always seeks the flourishing and protection of others.
So we have this profound moral wisdom operating at the highest levels of government. But how does that actually translate to the everyday life of the nation?
What do you mean?
Well, a wise king in a courtroom is great, but if the economy is crashing and the borders are porous, the kingdom isn't thriving, right?
Oh, absolutely. Which leads right into the next phase of this polished threshold, the architecture of peace. We find this detailed in 1 Kings chapter 4, which describes the administration of this kingdom.
Okay.
And the text paints a picture of absolute, unprecedented security. It says, "Judah and Israel live safely, every man under his vine and under his fig tree."
Okay, pause right there. Every man under his vine and under his fig tree. I know that phrase gets used a lot in historical texts, like George Washington used to quote it all the time about retiring to Mount Vernon.
Yes, it's a very famous idiom now.
But what does that actually mean in the context of the ancient Near East?
Velazquez notes that this specific phrase is loaded with theological meaning. It evokes covenant peace and what theologians call eschatological rest.
Wait, let me stop you there. Eschatological rest. That's a heavy academic term. For the listener who hasn't been to seminary, you mean having to do with the end of the world, right? Like the final state of things?
Yes, exactly. Eschatology is the study of final things, the ultimate destiny of humanity. So eschatological rest means a state of perfect, ultimate peace that God promises at the end of history.
A time when all striving, all war, and all fear are permanently finished.
Right. In the ancient world, agriculture was incredibly vulnerable. If an invading army came over the hill, the first thing they did was burn your wheat fields and cut down your fruit trees to starve you out.
Which is devastating because a fig tree takes years to mature and produce fruit.
Exactly. So to sit under your own vine and fig tree means nobody is coming to take what you have grown. You aren't constantly watching the horizon for enemy chariots.
You can actually relax.
Yes. It is the ultimate picture of secure, unthreatened flourishing. It's a taste of that final, perfect peace right in the middle of human history.
And the essay is very careful to point out that this prosperity isn't an accident. It's not like they just had a few years of really good weather and happened to strike gold.
No, it is the direct, systemic fruit of an ordered reign. What's fascinating here is how the text details Solomon's intellectual sweep alongside this political order.
Right. He isn't just a shrewd politician or an economist.
Not at all. The text describes him composing 3,000 proverbs and 1,005 songs. It says he spoke of trees, from the massive cedars of Lebanon down to the tiny hyssop growing out of a wall. He spoke of beasts, of birds, of reptiles, and of fish.
He's like a Renaissance man, a few millennia before the Renaissance.
Yeah, exactly.
He's a philosopher, a poet, a botanist, a marine biologist. But why does the Bible bother telling us that he studied plants and fish? It feels like a weird tangent in the middle of a story about a massive kingdom.
It seems like a tangent to our modern ears, but Velazquez argues that this isn't just ancient trivia to prove how smart he was. Solomon's expansive mind, his disciplined imagination, it all mirrors the orderliness of God's original creation.
Okay, so it ties back to Genesis.
Exactly. Think back to the Garden of Eden. The original mandate for humanity, for Adam, was to name the animals, to cultivate the garden, to understand and order the physical world.
So Solomon is doing exactly that.
He is. He is categorizing and understanding the world the way God designed it to be understood. It is wisdom manifesting as a deep, comprehensive mastery of reality. He is bringing the chaos of the natural world into intellectual order.
Okay, that makes total sense. So you have the political order, the intellectual order, the economic order, and all of that funnels directly into the absolute climax of his reign, the ultimate physical manifestation of this era.
The construction of the temple in Jerusalem.
Yes. We find the detailed blueprints and logistics of this in 1 Kings chapters 5 through 8. And if we connect this to the bigger picture, we have to understand that in the biblical worldview, the temple is not just a really nice civic building project.
No, it's not just a big cathedral to show off their wealth. It is the architectural center of covenant life.
The essay says it is the visible sign that Israel's God is not distant but present. And the sheer logistics of building it are staggering.
Oh, massive. He's negotiating with foreign kings for the cedars of Lebanon. He's conscripting massive labor forces to quarry these huge stones.
And doing it so precisely that the text says no hammer or tool of iron was heard in the house while it was being built.
Which is an incredible feat of engineering. The dimensions, the overlaid gold, the precise carvings of cherubim and palm trees, which, again, harks back to the imagery of the Garden of Eden.
It's all designed to communicate absolute reverence.
And when this magnificent structure is finally finished and dedicated, Solomon prays a prayer that Velazquez calls one of the richest theological texts in the entire Old Testament.
It really is beautiful.
Solomon stands before this incredible gleaming structure, and he explicitly acknowledges a profound tension. He says, "But will God indeed dwell on the earth? Behold, heaven and the highest heaven cannot contain you. How much less this house that I have built?"
Okay, I have to jump in here and push back on this on behalf of anyone listening who might be scratching their head.
Sure, go for it.
Wait, if the text literally says, and Solomon himself admits, that God is so vast, so infinite, that the entire cosmos, the heavens themselves, cannot contain him, why does God need a local, physical box like a temple in Jerusalem?
It's a great question.
Doesn't that domesticate God? Doesn't it reduce the infinite creator of the universe to a regional, tribal deity living in a golden room?
That is an excellent pushback, and it is the exact tension the biblical text wants you to feel. Velazquez uses the text to answer that directly. The temple absolutely does not contain God.
Okay.
Solomon himself vehemently denies that idea in his prayer, as we just saw. Rather, the temple is a sign of what the author calls gracious nearness and mediation.
Gracious nearness, let's unpack that. What does that look like?
The concept is that God remains entirely holy, entirely infinite and unmanageable. You cannot put him in a box. You cannot manipulate him with rituals like the surrounding pagan nations tried to do with their gods. But in his mercy, he makes himself graciously accessible at this specific location. The temple is where heaven and earth symbolically overlap.
It's a meeting place.
Yes. It is the designated place where prayer is heard, where the brokenness of the people is dealt with through the sacrificial system, and where covenant mercy is made available to a flawed nation. It's not about containing God. It's about God condescending to meet humanity where they are in a way they can physically interact with.
I love that. It makes me think of like a magnifying glass.
Oh, how so?
Well, the sun's rays are everywhere. I mean,
Yeah.
they are massive and infinite. But if you want to harness that heat to start a fire, you use a magnifying glass to create a specific point of intense focus.
Oh, that's good.
The magnifying glass doesn't contain the sun, not even close, but it mediates the sun's presence in a specific, tangible, powerful way. The temple is the magnifying glass for the presence of God.
And a beautiful analogy. And the text provides a stunning, terrifying, visual confirmation of this theology of presence. At the dedication of the temple, a glory cloud, the tangible, visible manifestation of God's presence, physically fills the temple.
The text says the priests actually have to stop ministering and back out because the presence is so heavy and overwhelming.
It's the ultimate stamp of divine approval. The essay says, the reign of Solomon reaches its highest point when the glory of God fills the dwelling place of God among the people of God.
It gives me chills just thinking about the majesty of that moment. If you're looking for the absolute zenith, the absolute peak of the polished threshold, that is it.
It is the high water mark of the Old Testament.
Yeah.
But, as we are about to see, The moment you reach the peak, the descent begins.
All right. Okay, here's where it gets really interesting. Because you've built this literal shining beacon in the middle of the ancient world, you've cornered the market on peace, wealth, and intellect. I have to imagine that in a world where news travels by caravan and merchant ships, people are going to start talking.
Oh, absolutely. A light that bright doesn't just illuminate your own house, it shines out into the dark.
Which brings us to the phenomenon of viral glory.
Yes. In 1 Kings chapter 10, the fame of Solomon's kingdom has spread so far that foreign dignitaries are showing up just to see if the rumors are true,
Like ancient tourists.
basically.
Hmm.
And the most famous example, of course, is the Queen of Sheba.
She travels from the ends of the known earth, likely modern-day Yemen or Ethiopia, bringing a massive caravan of camels bearing spices, precious stones, and gold.
And she doesn't come just to trade commodities. The text says she comes to test him with hard questions.
She wants to see if this legendary wisdom is real or if it's just really good state-sponsored PR.
Exactly. And the result of her visit is profound. She is utterly overwhelmed. But the text is very specific about what takes her breath away.
It's not just the gold, right?
No, it's not just the sheer volume of gold, though there was plenty of it. It's the order. She observes the house he had built, the food on his table, the specific seating of his officials, the precise way his servants attend to him, their clothing, and the burnt offerings he makes at the house of the Lord.
The structure, the beauty, the deliberate intentionality of the society itself is what leaves her breathless.
Yes, she actually blesses Israel's God. She says, "The report was true, but the half was not told me." The reality was better than the hype. And she acknowledges that God placed Solomon on the throne to execute justice and righteousness.
Villaisis points out a crucial theological principle here. He contrasts glory as a witness versus glory as corruption.
Yes, this is key. In the case of the Queen of Sheba, we see glory functioning exactly as it was intended. It acts as a witness.
Meaning the wealth and the wisdom weren't just given to Solomon so he could sit on a pile of gold and be comfortable.
Exactly. Solomon's splendor is not meant to terminate on Israel's comfort. It is outward-facing. It is meant to draw the nations into astonishment before the wisdom and goodness of Israel's God.
It's a beacon.
Right. Villaisis notes that this moment begins to fulfill the ancient promise made to Abraham way back in Genesis, that through Israel all the nations of the earth would be blessed. The Queen of Sheba is living proof that the system works.
So she sees the kingdom, she recognizes the order, and she praises the God who gave it. That is the peak functioning of the polished threshold.
But
And this is the massive, tragic pivot of the whole story. The very things that made the kingdom glorious were simultaneously inviting incredibly dangerous, insidious compromises.
yes, the cracks in the foundation are already forming, even while the gold is being polished. And to understand why, the author draws our attention back to a stark warning given in the book of Deuteronomy, chapter 17, written centuries before Solomon was even born.
Okay, Deuteronomy 17, the law of the kings. I don't have the exact rules in front of me, but I know it was basically a list of things a future king was explicitly forbidden from doing. What were the specific rules?
Deuteronomy 17 laid out 3 explicit prohibitions for any future king of Israel. First, he must not multiply horses for himself, or cause the people to return to Egypt to acquire them.
Okay, no horses.
Second, he must not multiply wives to himself, lest his heart turn away. And third, he must not greatly multiply for himself silver and gold.
Horses, wives, and wealth. Now, wait a minute. If you are the king of a tiny nation surrounded by massive, aggressive superpowers like Egypt to the south and the emerging Assyrian Empire to the north, isn't building a massive cavalry and securing your economy just common sense?
It seems like basic national defense.
Right. Why is God penalizing a king for basic national defense and economic policy?
It definitely seems counterintuitive to our modern political minds. But let's break down the mechanics of the ancient Near East to understand why these 3 things were forbidden.
Okay, let's start with the horses.
Multiplying horses wasn't about having pets. Horses and chariots were the ultimate military technology of the day. They were the ancient equivalent of nuclear submarines or stealth bombers.
Ah, okay. That
Yeah.
changes the picture.
Right. To build a massive standing cavalry meant you were relying on your own military-industrial complex rather than relying on God for defense. Furthermore, to get the best horses, you had to trade with Egypt, which meant retangling your nation with the very empire God had rescued them from in the Exodus.
Okay, so horses equal self-reliance and returning to the exact oppression they were saved from. What about the wives? Obviously, 700 wives is excessive by any standard, but what was the political mechanism there?
In the ancient world, you didn't usually marry foreign princesses for romance. You married them to secure political treaties and borders.
It's diplomacy.
Exactly. If Solomon marries the pharaoh's daughter, Egypt isn't going to invade Israel because the pharaoh isn't going to attack his own daughter's household. It was standard, shrewd foreign policy.
But the text says this was a theological disaster.
Because every foreign princess came with her own foreign gods, her own priests, and her own religious demands, the law warned that these marriages would turn away his heart.
Which is exactly what happens.
Yes. And finally, multiplying silver and gold wasn't just about being wealthy, which God had already promised him. It was about hoarding resources, taxing the populace heavily to sustain an opulent royal court, and placing trust in financial security rather than covenant loyalty.
Horses, wives, and wealth. The exact three things that define imperial power in the ancient world. And what does Solomon do?
He does all three, on an unprecedented, staggering scale. He imports thousands of horses and chariots from Egypt. He accumulates so much gold that the text literally says silver became as common as stones in Jerusalem.
Which is just absurd wealth.
And then the marriages. 700 wives, princesses, and 300 concubines. He uses standard ancient Near Eastern political strategy to maintain his peace, fundamentally abandoning the radical reliance on God that defined his early reign.
And 1 Kings 11 gives us the fatal diagnosis. His wives turn away his heart after other gods.
This is where Velazquez points out how quickly glory becomes self-referential and corrupting when it is severed from covenant loyalty. The glory that was meant to be a witness to the nations became a snare to the king himself. He became obsessed with maintaining the machinery of his empire.
It is the ultimate tragedy of the divided heart, and it really forces you to ask how. How does the man who had that deeply humble dream at Gibeon, the man who asked for moral discernment over riches, the man who built the temple and prayed that incredible theological prayer of dedication, how does he become a man who loses his moral compass so completely?
It highlights a core, uncomfortable assertion of the biblical text. Even the most perfectly ordered human achievement is totally vulnerable to the fall. Power, prosperity, and unparalleled success can distort even a heart that has been gifted with divine wisdom.
Solomon allowed his affection to drift, and when affection drifts, obedience fractures.
Exactly.
The essay notes that the builder of the temple becomes the tolerator of high places, and for the listener who might not know, high places weren't just geographical hills, they were pagan altars.
Right, centers of idol worship.
Solomon actually builds shrines for the foreign gods of his wives on the hills directly surrounding Jerusalem, right in eyeshot of the temple of Yahweh.
It's a staggering betrayal.
The visible splendor of the kingdom is still there, the gold is still shining, the temple is still standing, the trade routes are still open, but it is masking an invisible, rotting, fatal compromise.
Visible splendor masking invisible compromise. It's a terrifying reality.
It's like, imagine you decide to build a magnificent, totally impenetrable fortress to protect a priceless treasure. You use the best materials, the thickest walls. It is a marvel of engineering. You spend decades perfecting it.
Right.
But then you willingly walk over and leave the massive front gates wide open simply because you fell in love with the aesthetic of the enemy's architecture and wanted to incorporate it into your entryway. You invited the threat inside your own walls. You destroyed yourself from the inside.
That is a perfect analogy. The physical structure of the kingdom remained strong for a little while longer, but the spiritual gates were thrown wide open. And the author notes that this duality, the fact that Solomon represents both the absolute highest peak of glory and the deepest, most tragic compromise, forces us to step back.
You have to zoom out.
Right. We cannot look at Solomon in a vacuum. We have to look at where he actually fits into the grand, overarching narrative of the Bible.
Because this essay doesn't just treat Solomon's life as an isolated, moralistic fable about don't marry too many people and don't buy too many horses. Valansis maps Solomon across the entire biblical timeline. Let's walk through how he does that, because it radically changes how we view this whole story. Where does he start?
He starts at the very beginning, creation and the fall. The author argues that Solomon's reign echoes humanity's original vocation in the Garden of Eden. Humans were created to exercise wise, beautiful dominion over the earth.
Like we talked about with his study of the plants and animals.
Yes. Solomon's attention to architecture, his brilliant administration, his study of nature, all of this is a glimpse of that original creational order. He is doing what humans were built to do, bringing order and beauty to the world under God's authority.
So, on one hand, he's a picture of Eden restored.
Yes. But simultaneously, his idolatry and his tragic compromises prove the enduring, inescapable presence of the fall. He shows that even a king gifted with direct divine wisdom is still a fractured, fallen human being.
The human condition cannot be permanently fixed by a good political system.
Exactly. Then the author moves to the next epic, covenant and exile.
How does Solomon fit there?
Well, Solomon is operating strictly inside the covenant God made with David, the promise that a son of David would sit on the throne and build a house for God's name. And the temple and the peace seem to prove that God is faithfully keeping his word.
But the covenant also contained warnings.
Right. The covenant warned that if the king turned away, there would be severe discipline. Solomon's massive failure shows that covenant blessing and covenant responsibility are entirely inseparable.
And his turning away to foreign gods directly seeds the destruction of his own kingdom, doesn't it?
It does. The moment he dies, his son takes over, acts foolishly, and the kingdom violently splits in two: Israel to the north, Judah to the south. This fracture leads to centuries of bloody civil war, idolatry, and ultimately the catastrophic exile of the people to Babylon.
The sledgehammer hits the pillar and the whole skyscraper eventually comes down. Which brings us to the most critical part of this timeline, the New Testament, Messiah and the Church. How does Jesus of Nazareth factor into the story of a king who lived 1,000 years before him, sitting on a throne of gold?
Philasis points to a very specific, astonishing claim Jesus makes in the Gospel of Matthew, chapter 12. Jesus is speaking to the religious leaders of his day, and he references the Queen of Sheba coming to hear Solomon's wisdom. And then Jesus looks at them and says, "Behold, something greater than Solomon is here."
Something greater than Solomon is here. I want to make sure we don't just gloss over that. To a first-century Jewish audience, Solomon was the absolute gold standard. He was the peak of wisdom, wealth, and success.
The ultimate king.
Yeah. To stand there as an itinerant, poor rabbi, and say you are greater than Solomon is a massive, almost incomprehensible flex. It is a claim of ultimate supremacy.
And Philasis says this isn't just decorative language or hyperbole. The author draws the ultimate theological contrast here. Solomon is merely the shadow. Christ is the substance. Everything Solomon did imperfectly, Jesus does perfectly. Everything Solomon pointed toward, Jesus actually is.
Okay, let's break down that contrast because it's
Yeah.
vital. Explain how and why Christ is the substance. Let's look at the temple first.
Where Solomon builds a magnificent but temporary temple of stone and cedar, a building that was ultimately destroyed by the Babylonians, Jesus is the true dwelling place of God. The Gospel of John says the Word became flesh and tabernacled or pitched his tent among us.
Right, Jesus says of his own body, destroy this temple and in 3 days I will raise it up.
He doesn't just build a place for God's presence, he is God's presence.
That's profound. What about the glory? Solomon had fleets of ships bringing gold, he had thousands of chariots, he had international awe.
This is where the inversion of the kingdom is so powerful, where Solomon's glory is displayed in vast amounts of hoarded gold, imported horses, and political domination. Christ's glory is displayed in an entirely different mechanism.
It's displayed on a cross.
Exactly. It's displayed in self-giving love, in suffering, and in resurrection. Solomon used power to protect himself and his kingdom. Christ surrendered his power to save his people.
It's a completely inverted concept of glory. Solomon's glory eventually crushed the people under heavy taxation to pay for it all. Christ's glory lifted the burden of sin off the people.
And what about the wisdom?
Where Solomon's wisdom eventually falters, where he succumbs to the temptations of his era and divides his heart among hundreds of foreign gods, Christ is eternal wisdom incarnate. He faces the ultimate temptations in the wilderness and never once compromises his loyalty to the Father.
In Jesus, wisdom and glory are perfectly, eternally united without any trace of corruption. The essay even looks ahead past the present day, all the way to the end of the biblical timeline, to the new creation described in the book of Revelation. It notes that in the final ultimate kingdom, there won't even be a temple structure.
Really? No temple at all.
Revelation 21 says there is no temple in the final city because the Lord God Almighty and the Lamb are its temple.
Which proves the point that Solomon's glory, as magnificent as it was only partial. It was a fragile, fleeting glimpse. The final glory, the substance that the shadow points to, is total, encompassing, and utterly secure from sin.
The gates of that final city will never need to be shut because there is no threat of compromise.
So, what does this all mean? When you look at the tragedy of the exile that followed Solomon, and you realize that all that gold, all those monumental buildings, all that intellectual brilliance couldn't stop the kingdom from tearing itself apart, it leaves you with a really sobering lesson. When true moral wisdom is abandoned, even the most magnificent kingdom on earth unravels. Let me ask you this then. If Solomon is the high water mark of the earthly monarchy, If he had the absolute most resources, the most peace, the most divine blessing, and he still failed spectacularly, does his failure essentially prove that a purely human earthly kingdom, no matter how well-intentioned, is always doomed to fail?
That is precisely the theological point the author is making. Solomon's ultimate failure is the definitive historical proof that humanity cannot engineer its own salvation or its own perfect society.
Even with infinite resources.
Even if you hand a human being all the money in the world, total geopolitical peace, and a genius-level intellect, the system will eventually crash. Why? Because the human heart is still fractured. The system cannot sustain itself because the operator of the system is compromised by sin.
Understanding that Solomon was a temporary, imperfect shadow radically changes how we apply his life to our own modern contexts. And the author of our source text spends the last section of the essay doing exactly that, dispelling several common myths and laying out the practical implications for us today. Let's devote some real time to this, because this is where ancient history meets our actual lives.
Let's walk through those 5 myths because they represent the most common ways people misread the story of Solomon today, especially in modern leadership and self-help circles.
Myth number 1. Solomon's reign is simply a success story, a blueprint for how to be a winner.
We've touched on this, but Velazquez states emphatically, no. It is a tragic success story. It is a warning wrapped in gold.
Right.
The glory is incredibly real, but the decline is equally real. And ultimately, the decline defines the historical outcome. If you only read the first half of Solomon's life and use it as a manual for success, you are ignoring the sledgehammer waiting at the end.
You can't separate the wisdom of his youth from the foolishness of his old age. Myth number 2. Wisdom just means being able to manage everything really well.
This is a huge one for our modern, hyper-efficient, tech-driven society. We equate wisdom with optimization. But biblical wisdom is not the same as modern strategic brilliance. Wisdom, in the biblical sense, is covenantal.
What does that look like practically?
The book of Proverbs itself says the fear of the Lord is the beginning of wisdom. It begins with reverent submission to God's moral order. You can be the greatest manager in the world, you can optimize every supply chain, you can maximize your profit margins, but if you lack reverence for God's order, you are fundamentally foolish in the biblical worldview.
Management alone cannot replace obedience. That's a great line. You can't outmanage compromised soul. Myth number 3. Glory is always good. We tend to think that if someone is famous, wealthy, and successful, God must be blessing them, right?
Exactly. But Velazquez argues that glory is only good when it acts as a mirror, reflecting God's goodness to the world. It becomes incredibly dangerous, lethal, really, when it becomes human self-display.
When it stops pointing upward.
Right, when the wealth and the fame become self-referential, when they are used to build your own ego rather than point to God, that glory becomes the very weight that sinks you.
It's the difference between a lighthouse and a vanity mirror. A lighthouse shines out to save others. A vanity mirror just reflects yourself back to yourself. Myth number 4. The temple meant God could be contained.
As we discussed deeply with your magnifying glass analogy, Solomon's own prayer denies this. The temple is a sign of gracious presence, not a containment box for deity. God is not a genie you can put in a golden lamp and summon when you need a favor.
And the final myth, myth number 5. Christ merely continues Solomon's work. He's just Solomon 2.0.
Christ does far more than continue it. He fulfills it, purifies it, and surpasses it entirely. He succeeds exactly where Solomon failed. He doesn't just build a better physical kingdom, he inaugurates an entirely new spiritual kingdom that cannot be shaken.
So how does all of this translate into practical implications for us today? The author breaks this down into several categories: leadership, discipleship, and daily living. Let's look at leadership first, because that feels so deeply applicable right now. We live in an era of celebrity CEOs, megachurch pastors, and powerful politicians.
For leaders, the warning of Solomon is stark and terrifying. Wisdom isn't just about competence, it's about obedience. Velazquez writes that a leader who multiplies power, wealth, or relational entanglements at the expense of fidelity is already drifting toward Solomon's failure.
It's the danger of building an impressive public structure while tolerating private, quiet compromise. How many times have we seen that exact scenario play out in modern headlines?
All the time.
A CEO, a prominent politician, or a spiritual leader builds an incredibly successful organization. They are universally praised. But behind closed doors, their moral compass is completely shattered. They are multiplying their own versions of horses and gold, hoarding power, engaging in secret affairs, cutting ethical corners to maintain their empire.
And eventually, the rot reaches the load-bearing pillar and the whole thing comes crashing down in a very public, devastating way.
It happens constantly, and it always destroys the people standing underneath the structure. And the same principle applies to discipleship and daily living for every person. The author notes that the book of Proverbs, which Solomon wrote, is not a self-help manual for becoming successful or impressive. It is training in becoming faithful.
Because everyday life is filled with Solomon-like decisions. The essay asks a brilliant diagnostic question. What kind of wisdom will govern your work, your family, your speech, your use of time?
Will it be a wisdom that seeks to optimize your own comfort and glory, or a wisdom that seeks to align with God's moral order?
Exactly. Because kingdom splendor in a regular person's life isn't measured by the massive scale of their achievements or the size of their bank account. It's measured by their faithful order under the Lord. A faithfully lived, quiet life is far more glorious in the biblical worldview than a massive empire built on compromise.
I want to talk directly to you, the listener, for a second. Think about your own life right now. Think about your career trajectory, your ambitions, your family structure. Are you, in your own way, trying to build a magnificent temple of impressive achievements, wealth, or status, while quietly tolerating private compromises in the background?
It's that question to ask ourselves.
Are you equating good time management and financial efficiency with true moral wisdom? Are you leaving the gates of your own personal fortress wide open because you're distracted by polishing the gold on the walls? It's a heavy, penetrating question, but it's the exact question Solomon's life demands we ask ourselves.
It is the unavoidable application of this text. We are all builders of our own lives, and the materials we use matter far less than the foundation we build upon and the integrity of the architect.
Well, we have covered a massive amount of ground today. Let's do a quick recap of the journey we've taken through this incredibly dense, rich essay by Chris R. Velasquez.
We started by looking at the polished threshold, that breathtaking, perfectly aligned era where Israel experienced unparalleled peace, wealth, and order under Solomon's early reign, shifting away from the bloody wars of David.
We looked at the blank check at Gibeon, where a young, overwhelmed Solomon confessed his weakness and asked for an understanding mind to govern justly, proving that true wisdom is moral discernment, not just high intelligence or brute strength. We saw that in action with the brilliant, terrifying judicial test of the two mothers.
We explored the grand architecture of that peace, the bureaucracy of his kingdom, his mastery of the natural world, and the monumental construction of the temple as a point of divine mediation, culminating in the glory cloud filling the Holy of Holies.
But then we traced the tragic unraveling. We saw how the viral glory that attracted the Queen of Sheba eventually gave way to the fatal compromises warned about in Deuteronomy. We saw how the multiplication of military might, foreign political marriages, and hoarded wealth led to a divided heart. We saw how visible splendor can effortlessly mask an invisible, fatal compromise.
And finally, we placed Solomon within the grand narrative of Scripture. We saw him as a brilliant but deeply flawed shadow, echoing Eden but proving the fall, and ultimately pointing toward the permanent substance of Jesus Christ, the greater King, who unites wisdom and glory without a hint of corruption.
It's a lot to take in, but it is so, so rich. As we wrap up this deep dive into the sources, I want to leave you with one final thought to mull over, drawn right from the core of this text. And it circles back to that image we started with, the architect taking a sledgehammer to their own perfect building.
The ultimate tragedy.
Solomon's reign ultimately proves one terrifying, undeniable truth. The brightest, wealthiest, most intellectually advanced earthly kingdom still desperately needs a better king. If the wisest man who ever lived, a man who literally spoke with God, who had unlimited resources, unthreatened peace, and a genius intellect, if he could fall so disastrously the exact moment his heart drifted from the fear of the Lord, what does that mean for
It's a
us?
sobering reality check.
What does that mean for our modern, obsessive reliance on our own intellect, our wealth, our technology, and our management skills to save us? Are we actually building lives and societies that reflect God's moral order? Or are we just exhausting ourselves building temporary, fragile monuments to ourselves that will inevitably crumble the moment the wind blows? Think about it. Thank you so much for joining us on this deep dive. Keep questioning the things you read, keep learning, and we will catch you next time.